Hey Jessica, it's Heather. I thought I'd take a minute to respond to your discussion board because I really enjoyed reading it. I do agree with you that like step one really is one of the most important steps in treatment. When you're looking at the 12, what I really like is that they go in a specific order, right? I really feel like they're just like God ordained, just like start out with number one, right? Just admitting you have a problem. I often tell my clients like the hardest part about being human is vulnerability and relationships and everything else. And so the hardest part of step one would be that vulnerability to say, hey, I have something I'm struggling with. I have something that sometimes, like you said, is unmanageable or ultimately like bigger than ourselves per se. So I think it's good to remember, that part requires vulnerability. That part requires just admitting that we have something going on. You kind of said this, your last sentence in the first paragraph kind of says a little bit what I talked about in mine, because mine, I started talking about step three, right? So, like, each step plays into each other. So you're right. Like this step one is in alignment with the treatment goals of, acceptance, admission, and of course going towards surrender. So every step flows, from one to the next. Like you've got your acceptance one, and then of course the second one is kind of just believing in that greater power. And then the third one, which I kind of talked about in my discussion board, is just, kind of that surrender, right? That, turning, like Nowinski says, like turning our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. When you start talking about your integration of steps, I really like how you kind of start out with talking about really just getting to know your client, right? Seeing how they feel about their behaviors. I think the more you look at timeline, the more you look kind of at their story, the more you'll see the pieces kind of come together. I think the assessment idea is really good. I'm wondering if you feel like you would do that kind of session one, or if you kind of would put that with like intake paperwork, or if you would just kind of give it to them as homework or do it second session and on. Because I don't know about you, my sessions are 50 minutes. So for me to do like an intake, like timeline, all that kind of stuff, I'm probably not going to have the time to do assessments first session. But I do have a coworker that he's more works with addictions more than I do, and his intake, they're usually like an hour and a half. So I can see that definitely being, enough time to maybe do an assessment. One of the things I ask about when I'm talking about behavioral choices that they do, especially addictions, right? So I see mainly like kiddos and teenagers. So my addictions that I'm looking at are more like social media and video gaming, more than like substances, all that kind of stuff. Although I do see some teenagers with that. So I ask them, what do you get? What do you gain out of these behaviors? Because as much as you're looking at their story, the assessments, the timeline, I also like to look at, okay, like what are you gaining by this behavior, by this choice? Because I want to talk to them about more appropriate choices, more, delayed gratification versus instant gratification. So I also like how you close and kind of just say, hey, let's look at physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial, how things are affecting them, because that is like your main parts of your, of your life. And so really, especially like let's say in an outpatient setting, because that's kind of what I talked about too, you're looking at assessing them, of course, making sure they're safe and, but then like we're not their only person, right? So I like how you said journal, go to a 12-step group, get a sponsor, work through the steps, if you have time, look up, here in Dallas, we have Watermark Church, look up their program Regeneration. It's super cool. They took the 12 steps and they made it into a year-long Bible study. So they took the 12 steps, of course, which already have faith in them, but then added more, and it's like a every Monday night thing at Watermark that they do. I've had several clients go through it. It's the biggest commitment ever because you're talking about every Monday night for a year, but it's well worth it because they take the 12 steps and don't go through them in 12 weeks. They go through them in a year. So think about how in-depth that is. It's really cool. It's called Regeneration. I hope you're having a good week. See you in class. Thanks.